So welcome to the TEL Researchers at Lancaster May edition with Dr. Julie Voce. I'm Priyeen Wong, one of the organisers behind the series. Now, before I introduce Dr. Voce to you, I'd just like to introduce my awesome moderator today. John, would you like to say something?
Hi, everybody. Okay. My name is John Brindle. I'm an educational developer at the University of Liverpool, but also a PhD student at the university, at Lancaster University, not the University of Lancaster, as it's.
It is my absolute privilege to introduce you to our guest today, Dr. Julie Voce, who is the Head of Digital Education at City University of London. Dr. Voce is also a senior lecturer, also at City. And last but not least, she is, in my opinion, and this is where she will most definitely humbly disagree with me, a very successful TEL practitioner, certainly in the UK, and a very successful graduate from the doctorate in TEL program that I'm doing alongside John. So this is personal to me because Dr. Voce has inspired me to be ambitious and pursue my passion. So I'm really looking forward to this talk. Now I will shut up and hand the stage over to Dr. Voce.
So thank you for the very warm welcome. I'm Julie Voce. I'm Head of Digital Education at City University of London. I have a couple of other job titles which I'll explain later on as well. I'm really, humbled to be invited as the first graduate of the programme to the TEL Researchers. I think I'm following in the path of Don, Brett and Kung Mei, who are very well known to those who are on the programme. So thank you very much for inviting me. So I just want to, I'll start by talking about sort of my background and my career as a TEL practitioner. I'll talk about my PhD at Lancaster, and then I'll be focusing on the UCISA Technology Enhanced Learning Survey, which I've worked on as well. There will be some interaction, so in the chat, and there's a bit of a fun bit at the end, hopefully, which I've hopefully going to rope you in and John into. So my background, I think one of the questions that I was asked when preparing for this was, have you always been a TEL researcher? And I'm not sure I actually classed myself as a TEL researcher, or at least I didn't until I reviewed what I've actually been doing and thought, actually, I probably am, but where has TEL research featured in my career? And it got me thinking, what's actually classed as research? So my background, I have a degree in computer science from University of Bristol. It means I can code. I don't really tell my colleagues this because they might want me to fix things. And I have in previous roles fixed things in PHP, but yeah, I haven't coded for a while, but yes, I can. My final year project actually probably was my first foray into TEL research, although it was more on a practical side of things. So my final year project was developing an artificial intelligence language learning prototype software for teaching French. So the prototype was based on giving directions, and it used natural language processing to understand what was being typed by the student to direct the character Pierre around this French town. So that was, I guess, my first TEL research, really, although it was more of a practical thing, as I said. And I didn't really write a dissertation. I wrote a project report and documented code and things and user guidance and stuff. But it got me interested in TEL and primarily on the computer assisted language learning side. But I've always been fascinated by the different ways that people come into the TEL world. So I'm a computer scientist by background, but many of my team are former teachers. We have a librarian. We have people who've worked in course or program support. So just to find out who we've got amongst us, what is your background? What were you doing before you became a TEL practitioner? I mean, you may have just come straight in and worked in TEL, but just to find out a bit more about who we've got in the room.
So we have photographers, that's me. We have IT engineers, bioscience researchers, English language teachers, some TEL people, and developers, computer scientists. So a bit of everything, really. A wide range of backgrounds, as you would expect.
Quite a range, quite a few teachers still. And yeah, Brett, nice to see you're a computer scientist as well, and another computer scientist. Yeah, excellent. There are a few of us then. So I'll just take you on a sort of journey of my career. So having graduated from Bristol, this is where I went next. If the slide will show. So does anyone know where this is? Anyone recognize this? I'll narrow it down for some of you. I have only worked in the UK, so that might help. Yep, Phil and Tunde, yep, it's Manchester. This is what was the main sort of engineering building at what was called UMIST. So UMIST was the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, and that's what it was when I was there, and then it amalgamated with what became the University of Manchester back in 2004. So UMIST no longer exists, but this is where I was based in the Department for Language Engineering. And my first role was actually as a researcher. So actually I am a researcher by background. So that's pretty good. I worked on what was called the Free Text Project. It was down as an advanced hypermedia call system, so computer assisted language learning, which featured natural language processing tools and was basically sort of fairly similar to my final year project, which was quite handy. And we worked with partners in Switzerland, France, Belgium, and had support from a team in Canada. So that was nice being able to go out and visit all these different sites. I didn't get to go to Canada, but I did get to go to the other locations. So my role here was quite a technical one. I designed the prototype with language learning content. So I worked closely with the instructional designer and developed some of the multimedia resources for this. But alongside this, I also taught in the MSc in computer assisted language learning. And this was my first introduction to the world of TEL and VLEs. So if anyone who's been in the field a while maybe remember WebCT. So I think we were using WebCT 3.6 at the time. And we taught how to use things like authorware, how to develop multimedia. So quite an interesting start. And I actually started a PhD at the time. Being a researcher, I was able to start a PhD. And I started a PhD in speech synthesis. So looking at language learning and pronunciation, and the idea was to use some sort of visualization to help students with their pronunciation. And I actually got to go and visit some of the experts in the field, Cohen and Massaro, who developed an interactive speech synthesis talking head, basically. And they were at University of California, Santa Cruz. So that was a very nice trip. But unfortunately, my contract came to an end. There wasn't any funding for me to continue the PhD, and I changed jobs. So I went to become a learning technologist. So it meant I didn't continue, but my interest in research was there from the start. So I'm glad that I finally came back full circle and did complete a PhD. So it was something I'd always wanted to do. So next location, this is where I went after UMIST. Does anyone recognize this one? So it's UCL. Thanks, Phil and Elliot. Well done. So this was my first official TEL role. I was one of the first 2 learning technologies at UCL. So it's been interesting to see how that team has developed and grown over time. So I started there in 2003. And research didn't really feature a great deal as part of that role. I was mainly in a sort of traditional learning technology support role, but I was able to do a little bit of research as part of our VLE review project. So we carried out some staff and student surveys just to understand sort of perceptions of the VLE, what people wanted from a VLE, and that fed into our requirements. And it was around this time that I first became aware of UCISA. So that's the Universities and Colleges Information Systems Association. They're like a sort of professional body for IT staff, but also have learning technologists as part of it. And they run a biennial survey, which I'll talk about a bit later on. So the TEL survey, and I became part of the UCISA Teaching and Learning Information Group, but I wasn't involved in the survey at that stage. So moving on, does anyone know where this one is? I haven't moved very far, but does anyone recognise this place? It's Imperial College London, so over in South Kensington. Phil's doing very well guessing all of these. Well done, Phil. So I moved into a more technical role here, managing the e-learning systems. And it was around 2010 when I was at Imperial that I first became involved with the TEL survey. And it was here that I was sort of considering what my next steps would be as a head of e-learning. And I noticed that a lot of the job descriptions were asking for a PhD at the time. And I think that's because a lot of the TEL teams were based in teaching and learning departments, and there was a remit for teaching on a PG cert, or at least having oversight of some of that as well. So that's when I started looking around for PhD options and came across the Lancaster programme. And having worked at 2 institutions with very different ways of structuring TEL, so UCL was a sort of central team, very small team when I started, with some faculty information support officers, but mainly a central team. And then I moved to Imperial, and it was a very devolved organisation. We had faculty learning technologists and my central team, and it was an interesting way of working. There was a lot of negotiation, because of that structure. So looking at these two different ways of structuring TEL, it was something I was sort of interested in and always asked people, oh, you know, what's your structure like? So I thought, well, actually, if I was going to do a PhD, that would be something I was interested in. But I think, you know, for me, it was how do I fit this in alongside my role? And the Lancaster program really sort of worked for me. And I'll talk a bit more about how that works a bit later on. I think my department would have been a lot more supportive of me doing a PhD had my topic related to IT, but because the Lancaster program has a sort of taught part where you can explore certain things, and then you have the thesis part. My thesis, I was always going to be on structuring TEL, so I don't think it related. But they did support me in other ways, so study leave was beneficial. So I started at Lancaster in 2012. I was on cohort 5 of the TEL program, and I'll talk about that shortly. So this is my final destination. If anyone was paying attention at the beginning, you might remember where this is. I shouldn't say final destination, I should say current destination. Yeah, Miranda. So Miranda's one of my colleagues at City. Yes, it's City University of London. So I have 3 hats. When I introduce myself at committee meetings, I need to take a deep breath. So I am head of digital education, and I've been that since 2017. But last year I started in a new role as senior lecturer in educational development, only a very fractional role, but it means I can teach on our MA academic practice. So that's been a really interesting insight into the other world of TEL. And I've also taken on the role of interim deputy director in LEAD, which is learning enhancement and development. So I'm part of the senior leadership team there. So yeah, my role at City, I have a team of learning technologists, educational technologists, and our structure is where we're split into 4 different teams. So we have an operations team who provide support, training for all the core educational technologies. We have 2 school-facing teams, which are split up to support the 5 schools that we have. And then we have a projects team, and we work on projects related to learning analytics, digital literacies, digital accessibility, learning spaces, and I'm sure there are more that I've forgotten, but the team who are here can fill you in. We have a wide portfolio. It keeps us very busy, and they want us to do more. So it's an interesting challenge. Okay, so talking about the Lancaster program. So the Lancaster program is split into 2 parts. So it's a professional doctorate. Part 1 is taught modules, and when I did it, there were 5 modules that we did over 2 years, and then part 2 is the thesis. So for the taught modules, you do 1 mini research project, which is around sort of 5,000 words for each one, and it's very similar to a journal article. When I did it, we had residentials in year 1 and year 2. So this is my cohort, some of my cohort. People sort of drifted in and out of the cohorts as people sort of took time out and then came back. And then the thesis is around sort of 50,000 words. So what I'm going to do is introduce you to some of the topics that I covered. And some people approached sort of part 1 as, well, you know, you could just do the same theme throughout and just expand on your research as you go along. I thought it might be nice to try out different things each time and different methodologies. And in the first module, you're introduced to a number of different methodologies that you might want to try out. So I've got 5 areas here. Depending on time, I was planning to cover sort of 2 or 3 of them, and then we can always come back to another one. So I looked at mobile learning, and that was autoethnography. That was an interesting one because I didn't plan to do autoethnography, but there were some challenges there as to why I ended up that way. Career development, I took a grounded theory approach. Assessment policies, so I did a critical discourse analysis. So I will talk about that one because that was one where I actually got my paper published. Then Twitter communities of practice was a literature review, and then distance learning support. So I did a desk-based survey. So I did a range of different things, and I think that was really useful just to sort of test out different methodologies. So if you want to put in the chat, or is there anything that you are really interested in hearing about? Because I will talk about some of the findings for some of them.
I'd like to know about your Twitter community of practice, because I think that sounds really fascinating.
I think Francie's asked for that one as well. Miranda's asked for assessment. Yeah, I'm definitely going to do the assessment one. Thank you, Hannah. All sound interesting. Right, well, what I'll do, so I've used some magic buttons in PowerPoint, which I was experimenting with. So I will go to the assessment policies one first, and then we'll come back. Okay, so in terms of assessment policies, so this was one where I wanted to review some institutional policies which looked at electronic management of assessment. And around the same time as I was starting doing the part one of the PhD, I was also doing a few MOOCs because I quite like trying out different MOOCs. And there was one on corpus linguistics, which was being run by Lancaster. And it was fascinating. We got to look at different texts, different corpora, and it introduced you in the sort of video session to how you might do a linguistic analysis, and then in the afternoon or the second session you got to try it out using a particular tool. So you were able to analyze pieces of text, and I thought, oh, this is interesting because I like languages, I like linguistics. So actually, you know, if I could do something that analyzed a piece of policy, that would be great. So actually, I found this thing called critical discourse analysis, and this looks at the relationship between a discourse and society. So where language is used within a discourse and how it's influenced by the society that creates it. So it used Fairclough's three-dimensional analysis. So it's split into three areas. So one is around the discourse practice. So the type of the discourse used, so any transformations in the discourse, how coherent it is, and whether it brings in other genres of discourse within a particular area. So this was mainly a policy focus. So that was the main sort of genre here. And then looking at the text, so what grammar has been used? Again, the cohesion of the text, does it flow? How polite is the text? What's the ethos behind it? And then things like modality. So, you know, when you're talking about someone should do something or could do something, how strong is the text? And then thinking about the social practice, so the social aspects and power relationships that might fit within the discourse. So the sort of actors that you might have within a policy, especially a higher education policy, might be students, you might have staff, there might be particular working groups. So what's the role of these people in that particular policy? So what I looked at, was 5 policy documents. So I asked the heads of e-learning forum for any electronic management of assessment policies that were out there, and looked at it in different areas. So I did a structural analysis. So just looking at things like the layout of the document, how formal is the document? Does it have a title page? You know, very basic things, but actually all of this helps to make a policy into a policy. Basically, it makes it more formal. How coherent is it? You know, how have they used the sections and the topic headings? And then looking at the linguistic analysis, so the types of clauses used, and as I said, the use of modality, and then thinking about the actors within that. So I came up with some recommendations for writing policies. So they were based on 3 areas. So one was around structure. So, you know, the policy document should reflect a formal document, and it should have things like a title page with a clear heading and an institutional logo, because otherwise, you know, how do you know this is a formal document otherwise? And then it should also have things like just stating the author, the date of publication, and approval date, and who approved it. Because actually, sometimes the policies that you look at, you don't know who's created this. You don't know when they last created it. So it helps with just understanding the policy. Then looking at the language, so the recommendation was that there needs to be this balance between the enforcing language and making sure you don't appear too weak in the policy. You know, what is it you're trying to achieve? You're trying to enforce things, you know, and so, you know, a lot of the policies go, oh, you should do this. Well, actually, if you're wanting them to do it, you say you must do this. So it's looking at that language use in the policy. And a lot of them use passive tense, which means that there's often no subject. So you might say, you know, the handbook will be provided on Moodle. Okay, that's nice, but who is actually responsible for providing that handbook on Moodle? So the policies need to be tightened up a little bit, just so it's clear who the actor is in each of these statements. And just where, you know, parts of a process can sometimes be very contentious, especially with things like electronic marking, especially if you start to think about plagiarism detection or just some of the marking policies. So just ensuring that language that is used in a policy encourages rather than enforces action. So you don't want to alienate staff with a policy that seems too harsh and doesn't really take into consideration sort of staff perspectives. So it's something when we redeveloped our learning, our lecture capture policy, it's just making sure that staff concerns are aired within the policy and clear, so staff feel sort of supported rather than just this being enforced on top of them. And then just thinking about the participants in the policy, as I said, the actors who who are the people this policy is for. So stating the target audience, who is it actually aimed at? You don't always know who the policy is aimed at. And ensuring that students and support staff are represented in the policy. Often these policies are written with academic staff in mind, but there's a lot of other people. You know, what's the student's responsibility in a policy? What will the support and administrative staff be doing? So using these active clauses rather than the passive tense, and clearly defining sort of people's actions and responsibilities. And then finally, just using consistent terminology. You often find people referring to academic staff in so many different ways. You don't know, you know, are they calling them a module leader because that's that particular role and it's only the module leader does this, or is it a generic term for academic staff? So it's very unclear sometimes with policies around responsibilities. So that was one piece of work that I did, and it was one that I actually thought, oh, I did quite well in this one, so I'll submit it to a journal and see what happened. And they published it, which was quite surprising. You know, it was very pleasing. And it actually went on to become one of the examples for the Lancaster programme of people who are interested in publishing one of their papers. And I think that's the nice thing about the programme, is because you're creating 5 mini journal articles, basically, you have got that option to go on and publish them. So that was the assessment policies. What I'll do is I'll go back, and I think a few people have said they wanted to hear about the Twitter communities of practice one. So let's have a look at that one. Okay, so this one was just a literature review, and you know, it's interesting just to try out the different techniques. And I think I wanted to do some sort of desk-based research or literature review, because actually when you're trying to do 5 mini research projects, trying to get ethics permission for all of them is quite draining. And that was the challenge I had with the very first module, the one where I moved to autoethnography, was because I just couldn't get the ethics permission from my own institution in time. So actually, you know, taking a break from ethics and you know, trying to get that was nice. So this one looked at whether Twitter is a community practice or a professional learning network. I sort of looked at professional and personal learning networks. So in this, I did the literature review. So I used Web of Science and looked at various terms like community of practice and professional and personal learning network, and then drilled down into where Twitter might have been used in those. And I also reflected on my own use of Twitter throughout the paper as well. And I focused on 3 different areas. So one was about the comparison of a community practice versus a personal learning network. So looking at the differences in terms of the connections that you make, the identity that network has, or that an individual has within the network, the size of the network, the lifetime and who that's dependent on, and then the duration of the network. And so I found that Twitter was best suited as a professional learning network, and the communities of practice sort of tend to require some other space to enable you to identify members. It's fairly tricky, I think, within a community of practice on Twitter to identify who the members are, especially when you're just using hashtags. There's no nice list of who else is in there. And a lot of the outputs from a community of practice then tend to be stored across multiple people's Twitter feeds. So that was one of the sort of main things that I found there. But it was interesting to reflect on how I use Twitter as well. And I see it more of a professional learning network. It's somewhere where I go and I curate basically a list of people that I follow, and I use it as a way of keeping up to date with things. I'm not sure how it would work as well as a community of practice, but I'm interested in hearing other people's thoughts, so do put them in the chat. So I'll just move on to part 2 because I'm conscious of time. So part 2, I was looking, hang on, I've just got one more. There we go. So part 2, I was the thesis part, and this is me having completed my Viva with my supervisor, Paul Trowler, and Don Passy as an internal examiner and Neil Morris as external examiner. So I looked at the effect of technology enhanced learning support models and organisational culture, and supervised by Paul Trowler, who's an expert in organisational culture. So very, very pleased to have been supervised by him. So in terms of my research question, I was looking at it from the perspective of a head of TEL. How does an institution's TEL support model and its organisational culture either help or hinder the successful adoption of TEL? And I looked at it as 3 parts. So one was the types of TEL support model and how they've evolved over time. how a particular TEL support model helps or hinders the adoption of TEL, and then the degree to which TEL adoption is influenced by organisational culture. So it started off as a two-stage exploratory design approach, so looking at a survey followed by interviews and then identifying the themes from that. So the survey was sent to the heads of e-learning forum and 33 institutions replied, and then I followed up with 5 institutions, so 5 heads of e-learning. And following the data analysis, sorry, it's just slid through. So following the data analysis, several key findings emerged, and what I did was I presented them at the ALT, so the Association for Learning Technology Winter Conference, as part of a tweet chat. And the idea was to sort of help validate some of my findings, and it focused on some of the topics that I'll talk about shortly. So alongside that, I also did a directed content analysis. As you can tell, I quite like analysing texts. And this used the UCISA TEL case study. So these are a series of case studies that sit alongside the UCISA TEL survey, and I'll go into a bit more detail about them later on. So they were used to just identify similarities and differences. So it went from this two-stage exploratory design to a sort of 3-stage design. But I think the additional helped sort of validate the findings that I'd come up with. So the key findings were that support for TEL within UK higher education institutes have typically evolved organically, mainly by increasing the number of staff supporting TEL. And there were concerns that existing teams are becoming overloaded as more technologies are taken on. And I think that's something we've probably all felt over the pandemic, as more technologies have suddenly arrived, especially sort of virtual classroom tools. But institutions were starting to take a more rational and strategic approach to the support of TEL. So we were seeing people restructuring their TEL structures as part of a wider review, or because the institution wanted an increased focus on TEL. And where teams were getting larger, they were moving to more hierarchical structures. So I talked about the team at City, where we've got 4 sub-teams, and there are some other teams out there. So I think UCL is an example, where there are larger teams now with this hierarchy. But one of the challenges of moving to this hierarchical structure is that it potentially means there's less variety for some of the staff, and they may end up doing more mundane tasks like just responding to support tickets. So one thing we do at City is trying to make sure that the staff who are dealing with the support tickets also have the opportunity to work on projects as well. Otherwise, you do get a bit bored just responding to support tickets, although, you know, sometimes the troubleshooting is fascinating. And then local support. So alongside central teams, you often find what I've called local support teams. So this might be, you might have a team in your business school, for example, or individual learning technologists that have popped up for particular programs or particular schools or faculties. And these seem to have come about because the primary TEL teams, or the main team, have been at capacity in terms of the support they could provide, or there were specific initiatives that required that dedicated or specialist support, so supporting particular distance learning programs or doing instructional design. And some of these might be areas that would be too time consuming for the main TEL team to provide. And this has parallels with the core and custom model that Nichols and Anderson have talked about as a way of implementing TEL strategically. So the core would relate to activities which are common across all courses, and the custom are more flexible and maybe specific to particular courses or programs. But the issues arise when there's overlap between the central teams and the local teams. So drilling down into some of the findings a bit more. So the first theme I looked at was around the TEL support structures. So there is this predominant support structure whereby you have a primary TEL team who works in partnership with other departments. So that might be library or IT, educational development. And these staff are typically based centrally, but you may have some staff who are based in the schools as well. But they're brought together by the centre. And interestingly, in the survey, most institutions identified themselves as centralised, so saying that there's a single central unit. But actually, when I explored this in the interviews, it was found that most of them do work in partnership with other departments as well. So at City, although we're based in a Learning Enhancement and Development Directorate, we work closely with other teams, such as our IT team, who provide all the sort of technical support for the VLE and other technologies. And then the local TEL support is often not coordinated by the centre. So you might have some sort of TEL support which pops up. Like I said, you might have a separate team in a business school or a medical school, or just individual learning technologies. And there were some examples at the time when I did my research of fully devolved structures. So I think Manchester was one example. They just had faculty teams. There was not really a central team. And Coventry was another one at the time. The other aspect I looked at was around the location of the TEL support. So location in the institutional structures, but also the physical structures sometimes. So the literature has suggested that the location of the TEL support can really influence the perception of TEL within the institution, and whether there's a perceived bias towards pedagogy or technology, which has which can create this credibility issue. So there's a desire often not to be seen as an IT team. And two of my institutions, so when I worked at UCL and Imperial, I was both based in an IT department. You're often seen as just the techie, and what do you know about pedagogy? You're just a techie. So yeah, I think sometimes your position in the institution can really influence your perception. But it was less of an issue for some of the established teams. So those who felt that they'd been established for a while and people knew who they were, felt that it wasn't an issue whether they were in an IT department or not. And then sometimes being in an academic focused department will help with your credibility. So, being able to work closely with sort of the academic team who are delivering, the postgraduate certificate courses, and working with them can be good. But in IT, it can be easier to influence some of the technical developments because actually, maybe know the staff, who works on, networks, databases and things, and you know who to talk to. So I think that there are benefits of being in each one. But then professionalization also can help strengthen the credibility. So doing the PhD, I think for me has helped, but also there are other accreditations out there that you can do. And then finally, the other area was around sort of TEL governance. So connecting TEL with the university governance was seen to be this key enabler for change. So especially where it requires things like policy changes, and it can help lead to greater visibility of TEL amongst senior management. And the institutions I looked at all had some sort of institutional level committee governing TEL. And this was represented mainly by the head of TEL. And there would be other committees. So TEL would be linked into maybe the main committee through some sort of teaching and learning committee, or maybe an information services committee. So I think this is really useful for seeing how TEL connects in and sort of the route up to getting things done. But people also had sort of less formal groups, like working groups like project boards or virtual learning environment committees that would sit alongside this TEL committee as well. So what I wanted to develop out of my research, I think I said at the beginning, I'm quite a practical person at times. So I wanted to develop something that would be useful rather than just saying, right, go and read my thesis. Here's something useful that people can use. So I developed what was called a framework for action. And this was inspired by my supervisor, Paul Trowler. So this was aimed at heads of TEL. It's a series of questions which consider how effective the current TEL support structure is. So a framework for action presents the findings from the research and then provides these reflexive questions, which act as a bridge between the ideas that you're presenting, so your findings, and the actions that you might take to enhance a particular practice. So I used it for this TEL support. So the framework for action takes you through the different areas of focus. So one asks people to draw their TEL support structure and to think about the other teams that they work with. And I get people to plot themselves on an influence versus interaction grid. So the idea is that you look at your team in relation to some of the other teams supporting TEL, and you think about what your current level of interaction is with them and your level of influence. So it can be handy to think about, well, where would you like to be? So for example, with our IT team, we have a lot of interaction with them, but actually because we report in through different management routes, we don't have a great deal of influence over them. We can negotiate with them to do things, but actually we can't influence them. Whereas if you're under the same hierarchical structure, you might have a greater level of influence. Likewise, our academic team, we might have a high level of influence with them because we report into the same director, but actually maybe we don't have as much interaction as we'd like with them. So, this is quite an interesting way of looking at how you work with the teams around you. Then location within the institution, as I said, that can be really important in terms of credibility. So thinking about how your team's perceived and the effectiveness of the team in its current location. And I get people to do a SWOT analysis. So pick the location you're currently in and then pick another location that you might want to be. So often people will do this and look at, well, if I'm in an IT department, what might it be like if I was in a teaching and learning department? Thinking about how you as a central team identify and support local needs. So how are you connected to the schools or departments? How are their needs identified and supported? So at City, we have school-facing teams and they work very closely with the academics in the schools. They go to the teaching and learning committees. They get to know the staff in the schools. So they feel like they're a school-based learning technologist, but actually they work with the central team. So you haven't got those areas of conflict of the school teams just going off and doing their own thing. And then flexibility. So how flexible is the team to change? How easily can they adapt to change? So when new technologies are brought in or new policies are brought in, can you upskill your team? Are you able to expand your team in terms of resourcing? And then finally, the governance, as I've talked about. So thinking about the governance structures and then thinking about how strategies and policies are developed and communicated and how they fit within the governance structure. So I have had some people use this and they've said it's been helpful for them rethinking how their team is structured and where their team fits. So that's the PhD. I'm just going to move on now to the TEL survey. So this is a quote from Brian Owen. He's the chair of the UK Heads of E-Learning Forum, just saying how wonderful the UCISA TEL survey is and how useful it is. And it's something I've used, just to sort of show what others are doing in the sector. It's very handy when you're writing business cases. So if you haven't looked at the survey, then please do, because it can be very useful for evidence for senior management. So the TEL survey and the associated case studies, so this is national research into TEL. It's undertaken by UCISA, who I've mentioned before, and we have support from the Heads of E-Learning Forum. It's run every 2 years since 2001. It was due to run again this year, but we're looking at reviewing the survey alongside another survey that UCISA ran, the Digital Capabilities Survey, and looking at how we bring those together. So it hasn't run this year, but we are hoping to do some sort of pulse survey just to check where the sector is. So we've done a lot of longitudinal analysis over the past 19 years as well. And that's been really valuable just to see how the adoption of TEL and things that have influenced TEL have changed over time. Response rates tend to be fairly high, so sort of 62% 2020, 68% in 2018. And we have 80 institutions who've responded to 4 or more of the previous surveys. So, quite a good longitudinal study there. Since 2010, we've also done a series of case studies. So we've done 33 institutions, and those are the case studies I included in my research as well. I'll talk about those shortly. And then 2020, we decided we'd do some recorded panel sessions rather than the written case studies. And that was an interesting approach. So in terms of the research design, it was mixed methods. So it's a survey, it has over 60 questions. It's the sort of survey where, you need to sort of sit down and work with a number of people to fill it out. So each institution submits one response. And we encourage people to talk to all the other people supporting TEL just to complete the survey. And it covers these 6 main areas. So, factors encouraging development of TEL, the role of strategy, so internal and external strategies, what technologies are in use. People always want to know which is the leading VLE. That seems to be a popular thing. But it's also really handy just, if you're looking at different tools, you might want to bring in a new virtual classroom, go and look and see what the survey says that other people are using. Course delivery, so how a course is delivered, are they blended, fully online, what's the mix across the institution, and then how are people actually evaluating TEL. Then the 2 areas that I've tended to focus on, so one is around TEL support, which looks at the support for TEL and sort of numbers of learning technologists and things, and then the barriers, so what are the barriers to the adoption of TEL and what are people's future challenges moving forward. And then the case studies explored these 4 key areas each time, but then they also supplemented with key themes from the survey. So in 2018, we also looked at things like digital skills and capabilities, the role of learning analytics, and also distance and open learning, which was sort of emerging at that time and now is everywhere. So the question design process is very much sort of engaged engagement with the community is a key part of it. So we have a standard question set that we review, and we look at whether questions should be sort of left out. Should we do them every 2 years, or maybe we could do them less frequently? We engage with the community, so we work with JISC, with the Heads of E-Learning Forum, with the Association for Learning Technology, with other members of UCISA, just to review that question set. And then we incorporate the feedback, and then we refine the question set and then deploy it, and then it goes round again. But it's really valuable to get that engagement with the community, because we need to make sure that the questions we're looking at are current. So we might add response options based on things that have occurred. So accessibility was a thing that we included a bit more of last time, because we knew that with the public sector bodies, mobile applications legislation coming in, that was going to be more prominent in the responses. So dissemination is the area that I want to focus on. I'm just conscious we're running out of time now. So we've done a lot of dissemination. We've produced reports, we've done conference sessions, journal articles, and I said we've done some panel sessions as well. But with the conference sessions, when I first got involved with the survey, it was mainly sort of presentation. So you would have 10-15 minutes to present a massive survey, and so it was mainly just key findings. And we thought, well, how can we get more engagement with the findings? And one of the team from Sheffield had run what they called the Family Fortunes, which is a TV show in the UK, and I think there are other versions of this around the world. So the idea with Family Fortunes, the TV show, basically you ask 100 people a set of open-ended questions, and you see what their answers are. So we figured, well, we had around 100 responses to the TEL survey, so we would run TEL Family Fortunes. And so at AltC in 2018, we put the exhibitors, so we had people from the suppliers versus some of the TEL practitioners there. And what I'd like to do is just give you a flavour of a couple of the questions. So this is how we delivered the survey results in a hopefully more engaging way. So we will start, and hopefully the sound will play. Okay, so TEL Family Fortunes, the conference edition. Now, what I'd like to do is ask John and Puyin to be my team captains here, and everyone else can sort of play in the chat. So the first question from the 2018 survey, so bear in mind this is 2018, what I'd like you to do, the question is which VLE is currently used in your institution. So what you need to do is try and identify the top 5. Now, I can either get you to sort of buzz in to see who gets to go first, or we could just say, well, Puyin, do you want to play this first one? And if you get one wrong, if you get it incorrect, then it passes to John. So what do you think? Puyin, which VLE is currently used in your institution? What do you think might be the top 5?
Can I say all 5, or do I have to give some room for John to just say face?
If you want to give John a go, you can take it in turns.
I'll be nice. Mudo is obviously the forerunner, or Blackbot.
Yes. Mudo, yep, number 1. Well done.
Your turn, John. Anyone wants to chip in and help us? Just
shout, yeah. I'm gonna have to say Blackboard, aren't I? Then
that means you've won a prize, John.
Oh yes.
a free pass to the next TEL researchers.
Canvas is another one in the chat.
Canvas.
Whoa.
Oh, now this is where it gets difficult, isn't it? Bright space. There we go. Some Tamsin's put bright space in the chat.
Bright space.
We're doing well. Someone help me. The last one. Ola, is that how you say Ola? Yeah, I've heard that before, but I don't know how. Oh! Someone else help us. Go on. It's my turn.
So this is back in 2018. Yeah. So Canvas was quite low at the time, but I think it has increased.
Sakai, Sakai.
Congratulations! It was Sakai.
Got to look it up. I've not heard of that before.
Tamsin is the clear winner here, because she came up with that last one.
Yes.
Tamsin Smith, well done.
Well done, everyone. Yeah, so this was one question, so we'll just move on to the next one. Right, so John, do you want to start on this one? Subject areas that make the least use of TEL.
Gosh. History.
History. Do we include that under humanities, do we think?
Yeah, history. Yeah, it's a humanities subject, isn't
Call
it?
it humanities. There we go. Yes, there we go. Geography and history.
Creative arts.
Creative arts. I'll put that under the top one. Art and design.
Oh.
Sorry, that sounds really bad because I do work in a creative art only institution. That's what I know. Anyone want to help? Philosophy?
Jeff's puts philosophy.
Philosophy.
Oh no. Should I put my neck on the line and say medicine?
No, medicine is one of the ones who are quite high use of TEL.
Computer science. Brendan said computer science.
Put that under engineering and technology.
And a couple of people said maths.
Maths.
Law. I've got law. Miranda's put law. Oh no.
Not law. So the last one was social sciences.
Okay. I suppose we could have said philosophy was under social sciences, maybe.
Yes, I wasn't sure. I thought I'd be mean. Okay, so
I was going to say education and research, but then I have a feeling I might get kicked out of the program.
So that's how we did the TEL Family Fortunes, and it was quite an engaging session. So we had the two teams, but then in between this part, we also gave people the opportunity to sort of discuss various topics as well. So actually, it was quite a well-attended session, and it went down really well. I think just doing the game show format was really different, and people really liked it. So I'm just going to show you another game show that we did. I might not go through all the questions because I'm just conscious we're close to time now. Right, I'll just kill the music now. Okay, so again, we picked on different question types, and I think the challenge with some of these is trying to find a question type that fits the game show that you're trying to go for, but we managed to find some for this one. So this is the silent film round. I don't know if it's going to play my sound, but see what you think this one's about. 1, 2, 3. Any thoughts?
I know I'm on that picture somewhere, so there we go.
So this was just trying to show that there was a continued period of growth in TEL staffing. We had a 40% of respondents reported that there was an increase in the number of staff in the past 2 years. And I suspect because this was done in 2020, there has been a massive explosion of staff in the last 2 years as well. So we saw the mean FTE of staff increasing, and there were now 3 institutions with over 100 staff, FTE of staff supporting technology enhanced learning. So we were expecting that trend to continue. And then distance learning, there has been a significant increase in the number of staff in those units. Okay. Odd one out round. So please shout out which one you think is the odd one out. So we have virtual classroom tools, toilet rolls, flour, and conspiracy theories.
I'm going to say conspiracy theories. I think they went. Oh no, mind you, virtual classrooms could have gone up as well, wouldn't they? During the pandemic. So no, I'm going to stop there. Yeah.
Anyone in the chat wonder just come to the mic, shout. 5G, so MS John. Anyone else?
So it was, yeah. The odd one out is conspiracy theories. So all the others were in very high demand at the beginning of lockdown, but nobody wanted the conspiracy theories. So yeah, the findings said that 72% of institutions had a centrally supported webinar or virtual classroom solution, and that was a big increase from 53% in 2018. And then 15% said they were planning to implement or pilot a webinar tool, but we suspect that probably has changed because everyone probably has got one now. Okay, and then another flavour of some of the other topics. So missing words round. So I have brought in the guest publication here, which is the studies in technology enhanced learning. So one of these will be from that publication. The other two are from the TEL survey. So what is the missing word here? So what is the leading barrier to the development of processes to promote and support TEL tools?
Staff. Sorry, I can't help it.
Funding.
Time, competencies in the chat.
Yeah, it is. So lack of time is the leading barrier. So that was one of the findings. I won't go into detail. You can read the report. Right, video conferences in higher education. What?
Is my mic turned on?
The good
Brett,
frame. Well done, Brett. Yes, that's the real answer is the good frame.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. He's the editor of the journal. So that wasn't a fair round.
Oh.
Okay, I'm supposed to shut up. Okay.
And the last one is availability of what is the #1 encouraging factor for TEL development?
Frida said time and money. And Tunde said peer support.
Oh, please put your cynical answers into the chat. The real answer is technology enhanced learning support staff. But again, this sort of format made it, quite friendly, quite funny. I mean, some of the great answers that we had, in the chat and from the panel. So it just was a different way of engaging. So yeah, do think about doing this sort of format if you're trying to present sort of survey results. Okay, just conscious of time. So some other things I've been doing, which I think have enhanced my research skills. So being a reviewer for journals, reviewing conference abstracts, and being a member of ethics committees, I think that's all sort of helped me develop. And I'd encourage people to do that. But am I a real researcher? I sort of think, I'm a head of TEL, but actually, am I a researcher? And I think, having talked about all this research stuff I've been doing, I still have this sort of slight imposter syndrome around this. We probably all do. I'm even thinking about today. Will people really be interested in what I'm talking about? I hope you have been. I feel like I'm a sort of part-time researcher. I try and do research, when I can, but I also try and build it into my own role where I can. So we've been doing some research on the JISC Digital Experience Insights survey. So there's been some analysis there. Building in literature reviews to some of the projects we've been doing. But I think the PhD has helped with some of the credibility, but I still have that sort of imposter syndrome. I'm still, like I said, feel I'm a part-time researcher. And one of the things Tunde, who's going to be doing the next session in June, asked me, how do you actually find the time to do all of this? I have a full-time job, I have a family, I moved house during the PhD. I mean, I think my cohort probably had about 10 children born during the period of our PhDs. So, we were all quite busy. I'm not sure how I find the time. I think, during my PhD, I made use of the commuting time that I have. So I have sort of at least an hour on a train each way, and that helped. I think being able to just quickly switch into things and breaking things down into bite-sized chunks has been really helpful. I also reduced my working hours, so I went down to sort of 4 days a week when I was doing my thesis, and I think that helped as well. But it's getting yourself into that mindset of then spending a whole day working on the research. One of my cohort actually took a sabbatical, and I think if you've got the option to do that, then that might also be a good option for people. But I also made use of study leave. My institutions where I work were quite generous in terms of study leave. in terms of my research now, like I said, I try and embed it into the work that I do, and you know, working on the UCISA TEL Survey, it's sort of linked to my work in a way anyway. It helps me professionally, so you know, I make the time for it. And then future plans, well, I mentioned like we're doing a pulse survey for the TEL survey just to find out, you know, where people are at sort of 2 years on from the start of the pandemic. I want to revisit my research on TEL support, because my data analysis was around sort of 2015. So I'd like to sort of review that and see how things have changed. And then as you may have guessed, I like analysing texts. I had this idea to do a content analysis of some journal articles, and yeah, one day I'll do that, but it's just finding that time to do it. So any questions from anyone? I'm conscious we're at time now. I hope it's been useful. I hope people have enjoyed it.
So on the program, or on any PhD in general, I believe we're encouraged to publish, and this program obviously designed for us to write the little, you know, 5,000 words paper, sort of publishable quality. With the assessment piece that you did, how much more work did you have to do to get it to publish, or was it just the actual submitted version? And what was the process from submitting for the module to publication? What was the journey?
So I think when you submit for the module, obviously you get your peer feedback already, so that's part of it, and you have to address that peer feedback. And then obviously when I got my results, I had some extra feedback, so I just sort of tidied it up a bit. And I thought, well, I don't want to spend too much time on it, because you know, if it's not going anywhere. So I thought, well, I'll just tidy it up a bit. You know, think about the feedback that I got from the tutors, and then I just sent it off. And I think there was some feedback that again, it was like sort of peer feedback that I just updated, but it wasn't that difficult. I was quite surprised actually, because I thought, well, I'll just try it. But I think because I'd used the journal I chose, a paper had already been published in there using that critical discourse analysis. So I think, you know, you can see that there's already been a paper there, so they're more likely to accept it, I think. So I think that was probably part of it, you know, because I could have sent it off to another journal, but actually they may have felt it didn't fit. But yeah, I found it fairly easy to do. So I would encourage anyone, you know, if you're writing a paper for the Lancaster program or your own program, then definitely, you know, send it off and see what they think. You know, the worst they can do is say no.
That's really encouraging, because obviously we are being encouraged to publish our paper, but I guess it's sort of finding the time as well. And you've kind of addressed my other question I was going to ask you, was how do you find the time? So anyone have any kind of questions or comments?
I just have a follow-up to what you said, Julie. How did you go about choosing the journal just to submit your paper for publishing? Was it just something that you thought, this fits and I'll send it this way, or how did that process go?
Well, because, like I said, because one of the papers that I'd sort of based my analysis on, so they'd also used critical discourse analysis, but they'd looked at a different type of document. I thought, well, actually, you know, if they publish this one, then actually mine stuff fits within what they're looking for. But yeah, I think, you know, choosing a journal is always a really tricky thing, but I think you just need to look at where similar work has been published and get a feel for what sort of articles that journal publishes.
All right then, thank you very much everyone, and thank you very much, Julie, for sharing your journey with us.
It's great, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone.